Welcome to the Demystify Technology podcast from the MacLaurin Group.
Typically, you go through the due diligence process. What the world of private equity?
Right. Can't wait. Demystify it. Well, good morning, Jim. How are you today?
Just Andy, how are you today, Alan?
Great. Loving our Richmond studios.
Yes, we're looking out on Seattle weather for the 15th consecutive day here in Richmond. What better topic to discuss on a cloudy day than the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation?
What are those crazy Europeans up to now?
They've gotten very serious about data protection. This year, on May 25th, they enacted the new General Data Protection Regulation, which essentially puts a heavy constraint on anybody who is housing or processing data of any EU citizen, regardless of the national origin of the organization, controlling or manipulating the data.
Wow, that sounds very impressive. So it comes this May, but did we not have warning about this?
Only since 2016, April of 2016. So we really didn't have much time to react.
Right. So it's not like Millennium Bug time where you had like years to know this was going to happen.
No, it was they gave us 2 years, but the guidelines are such that they are so invasive in how organizations process data. There are so many stipulations around accessibility and control of data that most organizations aren't really processing data the way the EU would require you to conform to these guidelines.
Right, but you keep saying the EU and the Europeans. We're here in continental USA. What the hell's it got to do with us?
Good question. It has everything to do with us. If you're an organization doing business with an EU citizen, doesn't matter where the business is conducted. Even if you're Amazon here in the US fulfilling on an order of an EU citizen, and you are processing data in a manner that was not previously consented to by the EU citizen, then you have a problem.
So what sort of data are we talking about here? Give me an example of a piece of user data and how, as a user, does this regulation help me?
That's typically what we would call PII, personally identifiable information, my name, address, anything that can be used to identify me as an individual.
So this is information that I've probably given you freely.
That's correct. My inbox was flooded on May 25th with restatement of data usage guidelines from organizations. You get these emails saying we'll no longer be able to work with you. And in EU, I mean, just the most basic fundamental things were shutting down because everybody was reacting to getting consent to use people's data. Things like these smart thermostats or the LED lights. The smart lights. I mean, you wouldn't think, oh wow, my light's no longer going to work because I didn't, sign a new consent form for usage of data on May 25th. But all of that happened, which was probably a much bigger impact than we were attributing to Y2K back at the turn of the century.
Yeah, I guess the closest we could come to was when the Europeans, bless their little hearts, did this thing with cookies maybe 4 or 5 years ago now. Then you see it as a banner every time you visit a European website. You have to consent to the acceptance that this cookie is now going to be placed on your website. I mean, completely no bite there whatsoever. And just an annoyance, to be frank. So what makes this different from that? So
there are some very specific rights and requirements that are placed on an organization. So first of all is how you gather consent. It's no longer acceptable that you allow someone to opt out of their data being used for any purpose. You have to upfront stipulate the types of data you're going to have and how you're going to access it and how you're going to use it. How are you going to process that data? And then it gives EU citizenry right of access to that data. As an EU citizen, you would be able to go in and say, tell me all the data you have on me to an organization and exactly how you're using that. Also gives them a right to portability, which means I can now say, all that data you have on me, you need to give it to me or I want you to give it to this other organization. Also gives you a right to be forgotten. Do I want you to stop knowing who I am? And then you're talking about a data privacy by design. You talk about things like portability or right to understand how your data is processed. Most organizations weren't capturing data in a manner to support any of that. If you're a retailer and you know about Jim Headley based on my name and my address, and I have a transaction, generally all of that collateral moves along in every aspect of my relationship with you, and it's attached to every single record. That's a real problem. Now you can't just divorce the individual from that transaction. And that really caused a lot of organizations. In some cases, organizations just walked away from the EU on May 25th while they try to figure out how they're going to reorganize and re-engineer their architecture to support this.
Yeah, we've seen that. There was a number of big newspapers, etc., just did IP blocking and just said, no, you can no longer view our... They've since come back. So
Right.
clearly there was a little political stance there. But what about behavioral data?
If you talk about like a Cambridge Analytica, right? If you're using the information to affect a person and that you can tie back to an individual, then that applies. If you as an organization decide, I don't care about the individual. I want to glean all the information I can from how they've interacted with my marketing or the types of transactions that occur and have that in a non-identifiable data stream. I mean, I have no idea who this record is associated with. Then, yeah, you still have rights and can access that information as it would be aggregatable data. They don't stipulate that you can't keep aggregatable data. It's just you can no longer, without consent, have that individual attached to that information.
Okay, interesting. So, but what are the logistics of this? It's all fine and well saying that I can go and ask company XYZ to forget about me. But how does that happen? Do they now have to put in a process and a procedure to which I, as a consumer, can go to them to say, forget me?
Yes, that's an important point. And that's where EU speaks to privacy by design, right? If you do not have these processes in place to support this, you're going to fail. And failing has some pretty serious consequences.
Okay, so, but that's easy to talk about when we think about the Amazons and the Googles and the Apples of the world.
Mm-hmm.
But we all know that when we look at a website, it's littered with adverts and stuff that seems to follow me around. I just happened to want to buy a generator last week, and all I see now is generator ads everywhere.
Right.
I don't know who's got my data. How do I go about figuring all that out?
Yeah, that's an important question because it's no longer just associated with the point of data collection, right? You may have given information to Amazon, and if that information is shared with third parties to help them better market, it's also applicable to these guys. You have, as Amazon would be the controller of that data, they have to be able to speak to everyone they've shared that data with and be able to recall that information or communicate in such a way as to cease use of that and at least be able to tell the citizen, the EU citizen, where that data resides and who has it.
Right. So now the onus is now not necessarily on the citizen, but also the company to which I engage other companies with to make sure that they have the necessary procedures and policies to allow me to be able to stand up and say, I adhere to this principle.
And that's a very important point because it does move responsibility up to the May 25th regulation release. It was truly on every citizen to maintain their privacy. Now it's the other way around. Privacy is a foregone conclusion, and your organization has to be in a position to support the privacy of each member of the EU state without their intervention.
Let's go a little bit deeper here and make it a bit more contextualized to some of our listeners, etc. What's something I'm probably doing at the moment that isn't in the spirit of this regulation?
That an organization would be doing that's not
Yes.
in the spirit of that? The things that come to mind immediately are things like the Cambridge Analytica, right? That was using information and they were pushing this on to third parties. There's in the news right now, there's a Canadian firm that also made use of the Facebook data to affect the Brexit vote and to affect other votes within the EU that had no consent to do so. And they're right now facing some fairly serious potential ramifications in the event that the ICO, the regulatory body for privacy determines that you are in violation of this, then the penalty can be 4% of the worldwide annual turnover, or revenue as they call it, or 20 million euro, whichever is greater.
Wow, so there's some serious numbers behind those fines.
Yes. Yeah, and it would really hurt to be the first one, right?
I guess they've got to prosecute somebody, otherwise people will just ignore it and not let it take hold.
They're not going to allow that to happen. And so much of what they're trying to accomplish is to simplify rights and the privacy for the individual, right? If you looked at privacy statements prior to May 25th, it looked like legalese that you would see on the pharmaceutical side effects, right? And now it has to be very direct and easily interpretable. You should not see these consent forms that have 600 paragraphs that, kind of like the logging in and signing in and accepting the Apple service terms of our agreement. They're not going to accept these complex statements in order to garner consent. It has to be very direct.
And therefore much easier for the average user to understand
Correct.
What's going on. So say I'm a company now, I'm in the US, I have a website that collects data from either a marketing campaign, or I let people come in and sign up, whether that's buying goods or buying services, etc. Well, what should I be doing today? Even though I'm in the US and the regulation doesn't hit me, because most of my customers are in the US, what could I be doing to get ahead of this? Because evidently it's going to come to the US at some shape or form or guise.
That's right. You really need to start considering how you process and store data. First and foremost, do you put that critical protected data into every table, let's say, within your production platform that would make it difficult to retrieve or difficult to control? And that's a big part of what the EU is trying to speak to in the new regulation is, you have to limit access to this. It can't be, all right, this PII information is sitting in here. Everybody has access to it, and you can process it any way you would deem fit. You have to have very tight regulations around or policies around how that information is processed and for what purposes. Because in the end, you have to be able to communicate that. And all of that starts with, do I have a good understanding of the architecture I need in place to support that? Yeah. And that would include data schemas.
And I would imagine the right to forget is really probably logistically the right to be anonymized, because I still need to know that transaction happened in the past, that account happened, but I don't need to know it was Jim Headley that did that, or Jim Headley did that particular thing, but I need to know that somebody did, otherwise I've got a hole in my accounting.
That's exactly right. And one of the other requirements in this is that as you speak to how do I as an organization prepare for the future that will likely, this wave that'll crash on the U.S. shores before too much longer, they're also requiring a data protection officer. So you have to give serious consideration to someone who you would deem as the expert in the area of data protection. A lot of organizations see it as an afterthought. That's why the EU did what they did. The privacy was not by design. It was a complete and utter afterthought, and that's no longer going to be acceptable.
So the days of the days of a land grab when it comes to users' data is coming to an end.
I believe that will be the case, and it certainly has in the EU.
Well, absolutely fascinating. And I do believe you published a wonderful article on the MacLaurin website to go into further details on this.
That's correct. It really was speaking to the implications of the EU's GDPR for American firms. And you can access that article at MacLaurin.group.
Or now that I understand how to use our podcasting software, I'm going to put it in our show notes as well.
Woo!
I tell you, I'm a master.
Few techies.
Well, Jim, thank you very much for lifting the lid on this wonderful acronym that's been floating around for the past few months. And many people are still scratching their heads as to what it is. And some are even burying their heads saying this is not going to affect me. But
it's both my pleasure and my stress.
Thank you. Till the next time.
Bye-bye.